Thank you, Marco. Let me start by joining the others in thanking and congratulating the organizers of this event, and particularly Professor Letícia Pinheiro and her team, Luciana, Paula, Luzia. I very much enjoyed reading the two papers and listening to the presentations, both of which I consider very interesting, and I certainly learned a lot. Let me turn first to the presentation on South Africa, because it deals more directly with the issue of foreign policy, which Dr. Ziming Cheng did not address directly. His paper and his presentation is not about foreign policy per se, but more about Chinese perceptions of power and an attempt to measure power and to build a strategy, particularly towards the U.S. But anyhow, so starting with South Africa, let me just say at the outset that the paper is very well documented, and like I said, I certainly learned a lot. I have a couple of questions and provocations to the author. The first one is, you present your argument in opposition to neorealism, which I found a bit puzzling, because not that I'm a big fan of neorealism, but it's a structural theory, and as such, it cannot be expected to deal with issues of foreign policy, and it was not meant to deal with issues of foreign policy. So my question here is, why not present your work in opposition to classical or neoclassical realism, which are approaches that are similarly power-based, but that have a focus on the actions of states, rather than a structural theory that has very little to say about how particular states act. And I will have a little bit more to say about this in a minute. The other comment is related to the first. You clearly reject neorealism, and you make reference in several instances to the literature on interdependence. You speak about globalization a lot, transnational relations, and I quote here one passage where you put this very nicely: in the era of globalization, which is characterized by intensification of cross-border interactions and interdependencies, traditional interstate diplomacy has been replaced by far more complex environment involving a host of new actors and new issues, which is precisely what this event is about. But anyhow, in spite of doing this, you use, not in your presentation, but in your paper, repeatedly, the concept of national interest, which is imported from neorealism and which presupposes a unitary or monolithic view of the state, which goes against this passage that I just quoted, and your entire approach towards foreign policy. So that seems to me a concept that's quite alien in what you're trying to do, and that comes with a lot of theoretical baggage that you're trying to counter. So regarding the concept of Ubuntu, I found this very interesting. As you said, it translates as collective personhood, and I was wondering if it helps to explain as well the African peace. As you know, Africa is the region of the world that has the least number of interstate wars. It has a lot of civil wars, of intrastate wars, but very little wars between states. Latin America comes next. I'm wondering if this concept might have something to do with this or not. Well, if it does, then it also begs the question, why is so many armed conflicts as well? Anyway, moving on. You discuss how South African foreign policy is ambiguous, but it has become predominantly pragmatic and self-interested, particularly towards economic issues, the economic diplomacy, FDI, trade. And you explain this with reference to identities, particularly the identity of a middle-income country which is committed to liberal democracy and globalized capitalism. My reaction, however, is that, you don't need identities to explain a pragmatic and self-interested foreign policy. You can do it solely with reference to neorealist factors, power. An identity might have something to do with this, but you can't really distinguish both of them. And in all fairness, this is, I don't see this as a problem in your work. It's a general problem with constructivism. Oftentimes the predictions are the same as the ones of neorealism, and so you can't distinguish. But if South Africa is self-interested and pragmatic, then this is precisely what a power-based approach, a materialist, if you like, would lead us to expect. We don't really need to make reference to South Africa's identity, and actually, as neorealists do, you can try to generalize this towards other countries as well. And the following comment is related. It's about this decoupling. You have a foreign policy that in practice is pragmatic, is self-interested, yet the rhetoric is very different. It's normatively oriented, as you put it. It talks about human rights, about reform of the global economic order. And again, this is something that wouldn't surprise neorealists. And you stressed this as well in several points. This is not unique to South Africa, and like you said, actually a lot of what you said sounds very familiar, and I think could be applied to Brazil, and you put this very nicely. And this is the same, I think, with regard to our own foreign policy. Our authorities talk about reforming the system, about making it more democratic, inclusive. We need to change the institutions of global governance and finance and security. We want a permanent seat in the UN Security Council. Yet, there's a lot of rhetoric involved, and it can certainly be questioned whether do we really want these things, or do we just want to be included? Do we simply want to be a member of the club? Right? Do we just want a permanent seat in the UN Security Council? We want to be part of IMF decision making, the World Bank? Do we want a more prominent role in WTO? Or do we really want to expand, to democratize these institutions?